The record will be used past the microphone.
It will be.
And then we can use 2 microphones here for each event if you want.
The microphone is pretty sensitive on the computer. I turned it up like really, really high, but it will still be very helpful for you to use the actual microphone.
Okay, guys, thanks for convening during lunch. And we want to have an opportunity to discuss the presentations. Yes, sir. The time is now, it is October the 11th, and the time is now 12:02 p.m. We are convening, we have a working lunch where we will discuss the discussions that we had with QQ Research and then also with PCG this morning with regards to contract negotiations. I would just take this time, I don't have a formal agenda for this conversation, but I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts and processes about what they've heard from both respondents today, what your initial thoughts are there any other specific questions that we would like to ask of them coming back, or are you all ready to move forward with a preference? Or are there any specific negotiation points that you would like to have for either one of these organizations? So let's organize this a little bit. Let's start with Q&Q. I'd like to go down and get everybody's impression of the presentation that you heard from Q&Q. And were there any specific questions that you have for follow-up that you would like to engage with them with a conversation about? So let's start it that way, and then we'll go to PCG. Ms. Cummings, do you mind if I start with you?
No, I don't mind. I was very impressed with Q&Q and with their presentation. I was one of the reasons I asked a follow-up question to the second group is because I was concerned about their approach for gathering documentation about the status quo and how they would gather the information, make an informed decision about the needs, and the gap assessment. I was impressed with their what they call their intentional approach to gather information, starting with service providers and those in the community. The one thing that impressed me about P&G was in addition to a lot that they said, but they also said that they would have forums where they would actually talk to the youth and get input from the youth as well. And I thought that would be real good engagement. But Q&Q, I was impressed with the focus groups. To me, they were a little bit more specific about what they would do, their engagement, what their different strategies for gathering the documentation, and as well as looking at community groups, holding community forums, and what have you. So as far as weighing the two, I think Q&Q was just a lot more specific about their approach. PCG, I think, has a lot of capable people, but I just didn't hear as much specifics about what their plans would be, as opposed to the Q&Q. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. Just one thing that I do want to mention. I don't know if any of you are aware of this. I just found out last night. The Q&Q pulled out. Yes, was it Friday?
Saturday morning at 8:45 a.m.
GW pulled out on Friday. Q&Q pulled out on Saturday. And when I found out, my mouth hit the floor. I was like, you've got to be kidding. Yeah. And the reason why they pulled out was because the timeline. And they said, we did take a hard look at your timeline. We did see the fact that you all are on a crunch and you're definitely trying to move forward on this. And she said, but we really believe that we have to have the community engagement involved with the key measures. And our approach is our approach. And we think this is extremely important. So they thought that it was important enough to them that they pull out if we weren't going to allow them the time for the community engagement.
I didn't know that.
Right, so I do want to share with you all a copy because Holly had to rally the troops and say, okay, guys, you know, this is negotiable, this timeline is negotiable. I want you all to reconsider and please definitely come back. Yeah, come back to the
You guys
table
didn't
with
miss out.
us.
The
Yeah.
only person that knew was Ted. I called Ted and I asked him if it was appropriate, given the fact that it was a negotiable item. And he said, yes. I sent that to him. So then they immediately responded back. If it's negotiable, yes, we're back in, and you'll see the exact, I don't know if it includes my response or not.
No, it does not. It just shows her response to you once she pulled out. But Holly did tell them that it was negotiable and they came back. And that's why I specifically asked her that question today, because I was aware, I just found out about this. I'm sorry, I just found out about this last night. And she did make concessions that, you know, we do value the community engagement as a part of collecting meaningful measures, making sure that there is buy-in from the community, the stakeholders to be able to, you know, meet those measures, be able to gather the data, to be able to talk about those measures. That meant a lot to me, you know, and so, you know, the timeline is pushed back. I think she asked for an additional 4 weeks. And I guess my question to the group is, even with those 4 weeks, that puts the key measures information to us in January, that still gives us time to provide funding during the summer. Is that correct? Okay, that's why I wanted clarification on that. I too felt like Commissioner Cummings.
But before we
Yes.
get, just so it's close on the
Please,
record.
yes.
I just want the record to be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want the record to be clear that the communications that you just described were between the respondent and Holly.
Yes.
Correct. Oh, it
Right, so
was.
yeah, some of it sounded like you were having communication.
Oh, no,
But I wanted just the record to be clear that, because you
absolutely.
handed out an email with Holly, so those communications were through the authorized point of contact.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
I did not have any communications with them whatsoever, so, and I didn't find out until late last night. And then I almost went into a state of panic when I realized that, and then I realized that they were gonna be back, and I was happy that they did reengage here today. But I felt as if, and I love PC&G, I really thought that their proposal is extremely organized. They have clearly done this before. PCG, right, talk about PCG.
Oh, microphone.
I'm sorry.
So they responded to ITN before, yes.
Yes, they have, absolutely, and they know exactly what to do and what to say, and I value that, I do, I value that. But I felt as if the level of community engagement that I'm looking for will come stronger from Q&Q than what would come from PCG. I'm not saying PCG can't do it, I don't think that they won't do it, but I think we would have to push them hard to, you know, they even proposed, you know, guys, we can do this all virtually. You know, they actually said that at some point, and I was like, no, there's no way that this can be done virtually. Don't even consider that. So, you know, I think they're saying, well, you know, if y'all want the community, if y'all want the on the grounds, we can definitely do that. We've done it before. But I felt from Q&Q, they understood the value of that. And to me, that was a very important part of this work. So I'll pause there and give you all, the rest of you, an opportunity to respond.
I'll jump in. So I too value Q&Q very highly from looking at the application, coming in this morning, having just, looked at it over the weekend for the first time, the two applicants. I thought they were the stronger of the two. I do have experience with PCG in prior awards. They are an extraordinarily competent company. My experience with them is totally on the financial side and on the monitoring of outcomes side, which they alluded to a tremendous amount of projects that they've done, probably more in the world of working with community-based agencies around financial management, especially with CSCs, on trying to tap into federal resources on the funding side. Q&Q, on the other hand, very intentional about their community engagement and about their ability to do community assessments of need. Just from the very inception, I was sort of like more favoring them coming into today. Commissioner Cummings, I thought that Q&Q did not do a good job answering your question about inclusion of providers. In Leon County, we know that participation is a very, very sensitive issue. And we know that there have been a lot of public arguments about the haves and have-nots and about being and having a seat at the table. So I hope that we do have some more time with them this afternoon. I do want to talk about that further. And in that light, I felt like PCG had way too much dependence on this council to engage the community for them. We didn't really explore that with them, but if we re-engage with them, I think if we challenge them on that, we would hear that they need local connections more than Q&Q does. Not that local connections are bad, but I don't know that the council is going to be 100% available to do all of their community navigation for them. And certainly if they're not here and they want to be virtual, then there's a heavy reliance on the council. And I just don't think that's what we're trying to buy. Back to Q&Q, I think that one of their comments in their presentation, and I did spend a lot of time about this morning, but I thought it was really advantageous for them. They talked about hosting a visioning session with the board. I know that would require a public meeting. I know that would be in the sunshine because we're all gathered. When you're all gathered, you can't do it outside the sunshine. PCG, on the other hand, offered individual interviews with board members. I think a visioning session gives you so much better understanding of what the council wants to do than individual meetings would give you potentially 10 different opinions, and then they'd have to cobble that together. So I think from the get-go, Q&Q has a better perspective on laying the early groundwork on the project and really getting the vision really centralized for their work.
Well, I sort of looking back, well, first of all, can I just ask a question? I don't want to complicate this further. Why was the sort of the re-engagement with Q&Q different from, well, Holly's not here, different from the one with GW on Friday?
Yeah, was there a chance for GW to come back?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, I'll defer that.
Was there a chance for GW? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Holly had a conversation with their lead person, Daniel, I forgot his last name, up at George Washington on Thursday or Friday when they dropped out. And they had a good conversation. It turns out that it appears George Washington just finally, after they were selected, determined they just didn't have the capacity to move forward with the project.
So it wasn't the timeline.
No, it wasn't on the timeline at all. Although the timeline played into the capacity, probably if we give them a few years or a longer time.
We're talking about the annual?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so for
Yeah,
George,
Microphone.
Is that accurate?
I was just asking why, if we had the same opportunity to re-engage.
no, so with them, they just did not have the capacity to
Okay,
meet
so-
even a 7-month timeline. It was the compressed timeline for them, but it was the capacity to reach it specifically to start November, December. Like they don't have the capacity to get engaged for the entire team now, because they have other things that they're closing out. And with their Leon County project, with the resiliency project, they were hoping that this is the impression that I received due to a phone call that I took with one of their principal investigators. That they didn't have the capacity to do that while they're working with the other one. And so formal email was distributed to the team as what they stated.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure we were sort of treating everybody fairly, one thing. And which leads me to another point about what's missing, what we'd like to pursue. I was very taken, and Liza McFadden first noted this in the discussion last week about their ACEs approach, which is the thing that I really think is important and could be really innovative for our county if we find a way to, first of all, assess children for their ACEs exposure and then have a holistic approach to dealing with those issues. And whether they would have satisfied.
You're speaking about George Washington.
I'm talking about George Washington,
Right, 'cause
and they really appealed to me. I mean, I had sent a note back to Holly saying, oh gosh, anything we could do.
Yeah.
But, because I really like that part of that focus of their proposal. So that leads me to say, taking Roger's cherry picking and planting idea, is, could we ask the others about the ACEs prism, through which to view issues in our county, and their experience in doing that, and their capacity to do that within the confines of this project. And I think that well, I think being able to add that in will give us, help us build a more system approach to these kinds of issues, and will be innovative. I think we'll stand out. My concern about the Q&Q, which I actually like better, particularly this morning, was that they had only they have mostly a Florida focus. And as good as the other CSCs are, and I've worked with Broward and obviously Dave Lawrence, everybody knows Dave Lawrence, but we don't have, they didn't have a lot of outside exposure. PCG has that, but they didn't impress me really on the rest of it, the Florida connection. And I found myself rereading early this morning the H&H one, and I liked it. I just found myself liking it better. H&H. That's the first time you make it. Q&Q. I'm dyslexic. At least it's an alphabet issue. H&H is the Allman Brothers old, and Otis Redding's old restaurant. So that was my thought on the overall evaluation. My struggle is the one I was expressing the other day, which is the price is different. And we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that kind of question. But that was my preference in terms of those two.
I want to make a comment about the ACEs thing just before we leave that behind. I actually thought from reading George Washington's proposal that the ACEs references were more gimmicky than they were useful in their design for their actual assessment. They have a pretty tree. They have the adverse childhood experiences up top. They have the adverse community environments below. The pair of ACEs. It's a pretty diagram. And a lot of people have referenced that research and talked about it. But how they were going to apply it into their assessment, I never saw. It just said using an ACEs perspective or using an ACEs lens or the pair of it. They kept dropping that vernacular in there, but I never saw the connection. So my trouble with the question is, how would you apply it to your assessment? I wouldn't even know how they would apply it. Familiarity might be a good question. Like how familiar are you with the study? How would that inform your assessment? That kind of thing. I could go down that road, but trying to figure out which one could use an ACEs lens better than the other one, I'm not sure that we would know the answer to that if we heard it. Well, unless you would.
Well, mine is basically, I mean, I think ACEs, knowledge of ACEs and ACEs data is a gap. And we don't know. The science is pretty good and growing on it, but can they tell us how we would come to understand the extent to which ACEs is an issue, including community-driven ACEs, like violence in the community and so on, and how that might be addressed in terms of a root cause. I'm not trying to reprioritize.
Maybe you could just frame the question.
I could do that. So,
May I, we were asked to submit, and I'm gonna project because who knows when passed over. We asked each of the team members if they were interested in submitting a question. And so for the record, one was submitted on your behalf, and both of the teams have this and are prepared to talk about this issue in their second piece. So specifically, the question that was given to them was, how would you evaluate the prevalence and importance of adverse childhood experiences, its impact on children's needs, and the value of integrating trauma responsive services in the programs for children briefly describe your experience in making these types of analysis. So that was submitted to them, and they have been informed, or they've been instructed to be prepared to answer that question in the second half.
That's perfect. So Neil, could you lead that conversation with them, please? Thank you very much.
David, can I add
Yes,
something
please.
to one of those microphones?
You get the other one.
So I think everyone said the community engagement part was important, so to help drill down this afternoon with these groups, I suggest you look at this. So Q&Q's proposal, their budget says they plan 6 trips to Tallahassee. Okay, and this morning we heard those 6 were for the stakeholder, the parent, kind of community meetings. They also talked about CBO, the provider meetings, right? So I would be specific because contractually, we ideally could pin them down on exactly, like you're telling us you're gonna make, effective community engagement, specifically what that's gonna involve. Because in PCG's proposal and in their slides today, they talk about 10 meetings. So they specifically said 5 for providers and 5 for the stakeholders. So I just think I'm always focused on details. So if we can get Q&Q to elaborate more specifically on exactly how many meetings would you do, and with who, between the service providers versus the community, that would be good questions for both of them. Because again, what we've got is PCG says 10, not necessarily live, but they've said 10. QQ says 6, and they've budgeted for 6 trips to Tallahassee. So I think that's key. The other thing I would push on, I think reading the proposal, it wasn't clear this morning, Mr. Allen on PCG is, I think he's physically in North Carolina. I did a little research on his company, right? So in my mind, whether, North Carolina might even be as close as Miami. So obviously, most of these folks aren't in Tallahassee. So how are their commitment to getting here is important, and who's gonna get here exactly, and that goes to the main point, is the key staff, because if I forget who asked a good question about the staff, and then it was kind of rattled off with, it was less than 11, but still a lot. So I did a handout based on one, just before we started. One of the evaluators at the meeting last week said, we should try and nail down what I call key staff in that handout, because we want to be clear, and Q&Q has a budget, so you can tell exactly if it's in their response. You can do the math, so to speak, and figure out their real commitment of resources. And according to their budget on page 45 of their response, 2 people, Ms. Torres and Mr. Rubens, are going to do almost half the work, 43% of the work. So we've seen a bunch of people, and they look good, and they present well, and everything else. It's Carla Rivera Torres and Gino Rubens.
And Gina's doing the inventory, and Carla's
Can you
doing the
project
inventory.
or speaking to a microphone? Sorry. Just project, it's fine.
Both Gino and Carla were identified as community program inventory people.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I have Gino as the data resource and managing person, and Carla as a comprehensive program. So that's what they said today, that what their role was.
Yeah, this afternoon, I would recommend we really push on commit, and what we'd like to get in the written submittal by Thursday is a project picture of who exactly, much like PCG had in its little slides. But we need that from Q&Q, and we need to know who is an employee of Q&Q. I'm confused on when they talk about the subject matter experts versus the employees. On page 7 of Q&Q's response, they do have a map, and we heard from some of the project SMEs, and they were on this morning, 4 of the 6. Are those Q&Q employees that Sandra can commit to the project and control that they're actually gonna focus on this project or not. So that's super important. I just recommend we really push on that because I would like to ask them in their final offer to clearly commit in writing who is the team. The handout that I gave, and it might be a little bit much, but the idea is add that to the contract, that we're gonna contractually commit, these are the key people. These people must be dedicated to Leon, CSC Leon. If you change those people, that's a breach of contract or we can ding you with liquidated damages. But that would be this handout that I just put on your place during lunch. So I would recommend that we talk about something like that with them this afternoon. We give them the handout and say, we want your final contract to absolutely commit. And then we want to know who are the people who are going to be doing the lion's share of work. They're big teams, and like Walter says, they've done a lot of ITNs, but project delivery is what we have to lock in.
I completely agree. I asked the question today, and that's what I was trying to get to when I was talking to the lady over here. Who specifically will be here? Is it not on?
You're on.
All right. Who specifically will be here for the community engagement? And she replied back, Alan, Camilla, and Jody. So what I'm hearing from you is to go beyond just her response to that and making sure that as they submit their contract to us, they're specifically indicating who those individuals will be, because that's different than, go ahead.
Well, what I would like, this is slide. So slide 5 of PCG's presentation from this morning
Correct.
is pretty good. We should be driving towards something like this,
Correct.
where you're specifically identifying people. And then,
What they-
yeah, and then you should identify of these people who are the ones we're gonna consider key, that they absolutely must be committed throughout the life of the project, and if they change, that's a breach of the contract. So we have a longer list from Q and Q, some of whom might not even be employees. So push to who are the key staff and what is their role, and then they've got to do that for the next 6 or 8 months.
So I thought that I heard that in the
She,
question.
Sandra said that it would be her and Amanda.
Right,
Would be, Amanda's listed as a research analyst in
and
a
she was
group of
reviewing,
3 research analysts,
yes.
and then Sandra is the CEO. But it also sounded like their proposal was heavily dependent on the management of SMEs
Yes.
that they would bring as they needed to the table. And the SME management would come under
Robin.
Robin. So that sounded like you had like she said, it was her and Amanda, but I think Robin
And
now
Robin,
comes
yes.
another big key player. So I think that chart that they provided on page 12 of their proposal gets us to a similar place that PCG is at, but maybe it just needs confirmation.
Of who does, I think what's missing from that is who does what, whereas this one is very clear, like the point of contact for kind of this work is this, the point of contact for this work is this. And the one thing that I noted was they're using the SMEs in lieu of local boots on the ground, like basically contracting with the local boots on the ground, whereas PCG was, we're only going to be successful if you connect us to the boots on the ground. But I didn't see anywhere in their budget, like, when you work with those boots on the ground, if they're gonna be doing the coordination and the legwork, like, how does that work?
Well, and I think the PCG use of Southeastern is interesting. If you look at the work and what they actually wrote about, it's all about workforce development and jobs and older youth and heavily around child welfare and foster care system, of which is a percentage of our population that we're talking about. So I think that while they had a design, it wasn't complete and it didn't really get to, and I think they are going to heavily rely on that bridging connective dot back with the council. And I think I asked this question last week, was in one of our answers to a question that came up in the QA on the ITN. It asked, are you going to provide support? And we said, yes, the council will do all the bridging you need. Well, how can we do bridging? Who are we staffed with to do bridging? So
We could facilitate as needed.
as needed, that's like an open door.
Okay.
That's not as are capable. That's as needed. That means you ask, we give. And I don't know that Ted and you are staffed to do that, because I know our council's not, the council, like we said, not our, the council's not.
Who said that, which question, who that come from?
I'd have to look it up.
I think Ted, and then we'll come to Fred.
So. Thank you. So from staff perspective, given previous conversations and the conversation today, I point out with regard to the focus groups on page 30, 35 and 36 of Q and Qs. On page 35, they say they will hold 6 community forums with CBOs. And on page 36, they say they will hold 6 focus groups with parents and guardians. So the total there is 12. One of the things they did not mention, or I did not see in there, was conversations with youth. So that was one thing. In terms of past conversations and what's in the ITN, Mr. Jones asked me this morning when he called to let me know that he had a bad back and wouldn't be able to make it today, that he was very interested in pursuing the conversation that was had at the last meeting about subcontracting with people in the community to actually help gather the information from the community. Number 2, the timeline that they have has expedited funding, if I read it correctly, coming at the end of the timeline, not in February or March. It's in the new timeline. It's in March, so that money can get on the street for summer. And that's something that should probably be asked. I'm sorry.
So that's why I asked her that question today. Will she be able to make a commitment for the key outcomes measure? That's the key outcomes measure.
Right.
Not the
So,
expedited. You're
yeah,
right.
they
Okay,
should be-
We're basing it on the old one, not on the new one. So that's what we need to negotiate.
Yeah, so they basically just, doing it on the new one, the timeline on expedited funding. With regard to the visioning, I would point out as staff that it appears unlikely the council will be able to undertake a strategic planning, visioning, missioning kind of exercise before the end of this happens. And as Mr. Sachs just said, having the opportunity to have the council have those discussions not only helps to make sure that they are getting 13 or 10 different messages, but also it provides an opportunity for the council members to understand each other and get a unified understanding of how the council is going to move forward once the needs assessment is done and the funding decisions are made. From staff's point of view, having had that exercise done will help to eliminate potential major pitfalls and dysfunction perhaps with the council, because you will have that conversation. Number 3, with regard to the depth of the analysis, the ITN asks for data to be collected at the county level, the school district level, the census tract level, and the neighborhood level. In their proposal, they say that.
Are you talking about Q and Q?
Q. I'm only talking about Q here. In their proposal, they only say that they will do county and census tract. So whether they can go to a school district level, or school zone level, seemed to me to be important in some of the conversations that y'all had. Neighborhood level, maybe too amorphous to really address, but zip code level also. So zip code, school zone, census tract, however, might need to be clarified. And
Q and Q data charts were at zip code level. They are mapping.
they did. And I think they put, well, yes. And that's just observations from staff. And I guess I would ask a question, and maybe this is a question, a legal question, but in terms of this afternoon, in terms of moving forward, I've heard each of you say Q and Q. I guess my question would be, is it legal and appropriate? And number two, is it the pleasure of the negotiating team at this point to say, I think, let's spend the afternoon talking through this with Q and Q. We've made a decision, or not. And I just wanted to put that on the table for you all.
So I like to take it, so my preference, I'm leaning towards Q and Q, and they've always scored higher for me than PCG. But before I hang my hat on Q and Q, I want to know, will they be willing to do focus groups specifically with youth? I want to hear them specifically tell me that. I want them to tell me that, yes, we will definitely give you information about the expedited funding by day 190. I didn't hear that from them yet. You brought up the question about the school zones, I mean, the data, the specific types of data. So if they tell me, yes, we can do this, this, and this, we are going to do these 6 particular focus groups for this population, this 6 for this, these are the people that will definitely be here, that I'm absolutely comfortable, and I don't have to bring PCG back. If they don't answer yes to those questions for me, then I still want to talk to PCG, because maybe we could get them to provide a response that we like better. That's just my thought. So what are y'all thinking? No? Neil?
I sort of agree with that, but I also think continuing to have that dollar reference point out there is useful to think about. I mean, that's, what is it, $30,000 difference in the bid. And I mean, I could satisfy myself that Q and Q brings that much additional value. But I think it's one that needs a little discussion to get to that point. At least, I mean, I'm not on the council, but I think somebody's going to ask that question on the council. We want to know how we evaluate the price.
Excuse me.
Microphone. Sorry, for you soft-spoken, non-projectors.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I agree. And I think, as your council had pointed out, that a lot of these issues, we need to make sure that they are part of the contractual language. And I think from that perspective, we can probably get there. My only concern is that I won't say that. I don't have a big issue with the timeline with Q and Q. I think Ted pointed that out to us last week about holidays. They just basically reiterated everything he said about Thanksgiving and Christmas and having issues with, generating focus groups and what have you during that specific period of time, that it will probably be downtime anyway, just trying to get people together. But I do believe that when we raise these specific issues, especially those that were in the ITN that weren't as clearly addressed in their responses, I think we can get there. I just don't believe those will be any major impediments, but I think we do need to ask it, as the General Counsel said, and make sure that language is in the contract on all the issues that we're concerned with.
The question for Neil, there is a $30,000 difference in the price. Would you be comfortable with us going to Q and Q and saying, PCG said they could do this for 267? Can you match them? I'm just asking.
Well, I mean,
I'm asking, I'm just
I
asking.
think one of the good things about the ITN process is they don't necessarily have to match. They have to be at least equal or better in value. I'm looking for a nod from Brett, I hope.
Yeah, I would just, I would not say to one, the other's price is this, can you meet it? What you could say is, we're having a little bit of trouble with your price, we think your price is too high. Your offer will be stronger if you lower your price, because that gives them all they need to come back a little lower. We don't want to be taking details from one and giving them to the other. That's not the best way to do it, but you can definitely say, to your point, if the concern is their price offer, just say that. And if you want to win me over more solidly, I just need your price to be a little better.
And then what happens if they come back?
Microphone.
I think we'll-
What happens if they come back and say, well, we're just really down to that, we can't reduce our price, we're
Then that's,
just there.
then he'll take that into consideration on Thursday.
And I just want to, also, in the financials, Q&Q did add an admin charge that in a small company with not a lot of projects, admin overhead becomes a critical piece. It was only 15%, which is a very reasonable amount. George Washington had theirs at their federally authorized 26%, which I would have, been definitely pushed back on, because anytime you do business with the university, you're paying for a library in London or something that you shouldn't be paying for. But PCG doesn't have an admin in there, which also could mean that they're cost sharing admin with all of the other projects that they have. And when you're larger, you can tend to give better pricing because you don't have to charge every award with an amount. And sometimes that becomes very competitive when people say, well, the only difference between the two is the price, let's go with the cheaper one. Well, then the larger companies tend to actually have an advantage because they can offset admin in other areas. So that's just something to think about when you're looking at a large company versus a very small company, as it might actually be more expensive than a smaller company. I do think though, and I think Fred pointed this out, there's an inherent risk in a fixed price contract, and that is their travel. I think they're gonna have to take a lot more trips to Tallahassee than either of them have budgeted for. And I think that comes with a risk to them, that this is a fixed price contract. You have to absorb all of those costs, no matter what they are, and the deliverable you have to deliver. What we have to ensure is that the quality that we want is given, which means if it has to happen, we have to have it in the contract. So we have to narrow down with them, how many trips, at what depth, and are you willing to come back, even though you didn't budget for it because it didn't meet the quality expectation? Like you didn't do a youth group, or you didn't include this party who wasn't there at Thanksgiving and Christmas when you decided to travel. So it goes back to contract drafting and holding people accountable to that contract, not what they budgeted or what you believe you negotiated but didn't put in the contract.
And we can always, I think.
Microphone. Sorry.
I'm sorry, just real quick. I think, Mr. General Counsel, we can always in the contract say a minimum of da-da-da-da-da. Recognizing if they need to come back more times than that, and they absorb it, themselves in order to produce a product that we actually need. But I think if we qualify, they are obligated to a minimum of this trip, this number of trips, that number of trips with these particular focus groups and what have you. I think we're covered. We're making sure that at a minimum, they are at least targeting the groups we believe that will give them the information to do their analysis for us, so that it can, give us some guidance.
And my input on Ted's question is I'm 100% ready to move forward with one. So if that's the choice of the group, I'm absolutely fine with doing that. Because I think we've got a definite disparity between the two as far as quality.
I'm there too.
You are, Tina? Okay.
I have a question, just point of order. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a short answer.
Okay, I knew that like making the decision to formally recommend is what's done at the public meeting on Thursday, but.
What you eliminate is you eliminate a VAPO from both. You can do a VAPO with the one, but you wouldn't then do a VAPO with two if you only move one forward. Is that accurate?
It's true, and I just reiterate what I said last week. If this is the recommendation, the nice thing about having two final offers is if the council doesn't accept the recommendation, there's a fallback and everything keeps moving forward. Whereas if you only take one, the council doesn't do it, then we're at the end of October and we've got to crank this back up and we'll never get,
But you could bring PCT right back to the table.
yeah, you could, but it would add a week or two to the process. You wouldn't have a contract effective November 1st. So one thing about having PCG here is you have the advantage of experts who do this for a living. So you can be testing, you can be asking them stuff and see if they say yes, but QQ says no. So you can use PCG as a foil, but they're valuable in this process. I know it's a little bit more work and it's another 45 minutes you need to spend with someone who you might not think would be the winner. But think about as long as they're here and you've got experts on Zoom, is there any value from pushing them on questions, asking them, helping learn from them?
And you still could do that process and still not ask for a vote, right?
Right.
You still could only move one to the next step,
Correct.
even if you use them as a foil.
Yeah, and can I just, process-wise, just so you understand, is what I've talked to Holly about, any hope of staying on the schedule. We need to ask them for something that's gonna come back on Thursday, and Walter, to your point about your job on Thursday is to see this and then have to make a decision. Ideally, what we ask them for something that's in a form that we just have to slap it together with what we've already got from the documents. And that contract is done and there's nothing left to do for the council but to sign it. And in particular, we've got the statement of work. If we had more time, you might fold the offer into the statement of work and come up with a single document. Over the weekend, I thought we have 2 attachments. Maybe we call this, change the statement of work to project requirements as exhibit 1. And then the new exhibit 2 is what they're gonna submit on Thursday. And that we can call like project plan. And that's what you're looking at to say this is it. And that's why we want as much detail in there as we can get. That it's a contractual commitment because that's what's attached to what they sign. Anything they say in the original response or say today, that's not really part of the contract unless it's that thing they submit to us on Thursday.
So,
So this morning, Holly and I talked about it, and Fred and I talked about it at length on, I think, Friday. And correct me if I'm wrong. So this is the plan for tomorrow. Holly is going to bring the contract, the boilerplate contract. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about this, although Fred summarized it. Is this a piece that should go into the contract?
The key staff, he's holding up the key staff. I would recommend, based on what we heard last week, this key staff language is
Yes.
something I would add to the contract.
So Holly will bring that to the meeting tomorrow. In order to meet the 48-hour turnaround, the meeting goes from 9 to 11 tomorrow, and then you meet at 1 on Thursday. We hope to get them the contract by noon tomorrow, so they can return it by noon on Thursday. And so Holly will be getting it copied on the running down to the building. She's gonna send them the contract, the boilerplate contract, and the scope of work, which is part of the contract. And then their section D, the deliverables that they have in this. Holly is going to, based on the discussion today, make changes to whatever is decided in track changes.
of our
So-
scope of work,
I'm sorry?
of our scope of work, not of their stuff.
No, of our scope of work or anything that's changed in the contract, which scope of work is part of the contract. At this point, there has not been any modification to the scope of work or the contract. And then there will be a separate document that goes to them that says, okay, based on the discussion today, here are the things that you need to change to give us the backup. Please make those changes in track changes so that when you come back on Thursday, you should be able to easily see and compare the document that they get that says make these changes and by track changes, whether they did it or not and how they did it. So that hopefully the meeting Thursday will be able to go pretty quickly as you can run through those changes.
So they're just making track changes to the contract.
To their deliverables, the section D, what they're gonna do, not to the contract unless they want to,
Okay,
but that'll be shown now.
Okay, so attachment D, so all these things that we're asking them to add to that, they're gonna go in and add that verbiage, that language to section D, and then attach that with the contract that they make or don't make any changes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, then,
So in between A and B, in between A and B, will our general counsel have the opportunity to review it before it gets to us Thursday?
Yes, because we asked them before today to, we gave them a copy of the draft contract, the front end boilerplate, right? And said, if you have an issue with this, we need to hear about it on Monday. So Q&Q had no issues with it. PCG had one issue with it, and there's a slide in their proposal that they wanted to flesh out. In the event there, they have to go in and do an in-person meeting where the strictest, on slide 33 of their handout. If they had to do an insight meeting where the best practices, COVID restrictions aren't being followed, that basically would be a force majeure, and we have to negotiate how to deal with that. They would probably want to say, we want to do that virtually rather than live. We don't want to go and do a live meeting, people aren't. So that's I don't foresee any significant contract changes. I heard last week, we have no changes to what was attached to the ITN as a statement of work. So our project requirements are going to be the same, correct?
With the exception of the revised timeline. So section D of the scope of work will be edited based on discussions today and reflected in track changes in what we send to them, and you'll see that tomorrow.
Good, great point. Yep.
Yep.
And so then the last thing we would want from them is basically take what was tab D in your response, which was your service description, and just give us that, and we'll make that attachment to the contract. That's your project plan. Tell us what you're willing to commit to do this project. And we've seen some of the slides, how you got photographs of two of those, and then we've got
And I
some
have the whole
stuff
thing.
here. And one example I would point in PCGs, for example, on slide 11. This is helpful because they take on the left side the ITN requirements, and then on the right side they have the PCG approach. That's exactly what we want to see and drill down on. And we heard this earlier, like they have submit data and information requests to CSC leadership as part of how they're going to propose to collect information. That might not be acceptable to us. So we just want to explore with them in detail how they're going to do the work. And then at the end of today, encourage them to strengthen their offer. When they give us something on Thursday, their revamped service description, play up this, commit to this. You need to say this more clearly is the kind of coaching we can give them to help them make a strong offer, both sides.
And a point of clarification, what is sent to them tomorrow will be the contract. It'll be the contract, the statement of work, and section D combined as an attachment with a signature page. And they will be asked to sign the signature page when it's returned. All the council has to do is sign it once it's completed. So it will be a semi-executed.
But again, to be clear, they will have 48 hours to revise, strengthen, beef up their service description. That's going to be their final offer.
We have 6 minutes, and Emil has a question, and then I have a question before,
I have to-
okay, before we bring
I just wanted to quickly close the loop on my point about cost and this. I do think that, small business has a cost disadvantage, and I think that's recognized in, minority concessions on low cost bidder kinds of contracts. And I certainly felt it when I had a consulting firm and had that same kind of issue. So I really do recognize that, and I think there is an advantage in the closeness of this group, and I think that is going to serve us well overall. The one thing I want to just double check with Ted on, you said something about the council's availability and provisioning. The council, you think, is available provisioning in the time frame of this contract, is that what you said?
As a group.
As a group.
As a group.
That's questionable. Just getting meetings of the search committee together for 2 hours to 2 months. However, depending on the importance to the council, if it's a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, or after, from 4 to 8 one night or something like that. But that'll be, the importance of that to the council is what will compel what needs to be done or will be done.
And one of the best practices for PCG is it's a lot easier if you tag that stuff onto an already scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
And just try and set up another one.
Okay, Holly,
We've,
and then,
we've done one visioning session in Escambia. That was a Tuesday morning from 8 to 10. And that was, I want to say 100% attended. Maybe we had one missing. And we have another one scheduled this month later. Nope, live in the community. We actually went up to a community site, not downtown. So the community could participate if they wanted to, but I think it does go back to what Ted said. It depends on how invested the council is in this process.
okay, Holly.
Okay, so quick point since we're bringing in Q and Q first.
There you go.
Ted, I'm projecting, I know it's picking up because I'm getting the feedback over here. So for the focus groups on page 34, Q and Q, at the bottom, they say facilitate 3 focus groups per priority area with our 3 priority areas. On the next page, it says we'll hold 6 community forums by sub-priority area. Further down on the page, it says a total of 8 community forums will be conducted. And then on the very next page, it says Q and Q will conduct 6 more focus groups with parents and guardians in high poverty areas. So we were talking about those numbers, and I just wanted to point out and I circle all of them because I think we've been throwing out numbers, and I don't know if Ted, you caught all of those, but is that all together? Is this in so the question that you were asking about trips is less important to me than it is about, because right, they can come up for one trip and stay for 4 days and do 4 things. So as we're drilling down, it's not the number of trips that I think that we care about contractually, it's the number of quality focus groups as indicated in here. The second thing, yeah, it's all Q and Q. So the second thing that I'd like for you to consider when you're asking with them or talking with them is they talked about developing the platform for building their inventory. And I'm curious, what platforms have they worked with in the past? I think that's something of value as someone who borderlines IT nerddom. That's, I think, a very important thing if they're saying, oh, we're going to set up, this is the data that we're using, et cetera. The second thing at the very end, she talked about having an equity focus and not just creating reports that are reports, but to do some data visualization. Is that like an actual mapping? Are we talking about GIS here? What does that look like? So those are another on that kind of platform question. And then if we have time before bringing PC and G, or I guess just kind of clarifying with them very specifically with Q and Q, is the openness to the local groups. Are they saying, we've got this? Or are they saying, we want you to make recommendations? I want that kind of clear and focused.
Local groups for,
The community engagement work.
to connect them.
They
Right,
call it
whereas PC and G was like, we need you.
Right.
Where the impression I got from Q and Q was, we think we got this, or like, we know what we need to do type of thing. And I didn't feel as confident in that answer as of how open they are. And so I'm just curious about that. And then I think that was my final, yeah, you had the other stuff about the timeline. So that was just in terms of bringing Q and Q back. I just wanted to make sure to get those on.
We have no questions for PC and G, other than being, yeah, that's my concern. What are we doing with PCG? All of our questions are for Q and Q. And I think it's because our hearts are leaning towards Q and Q.
Well, I'd like to ask PCG about their involvement with Hillsborough County School Board, or the Children's Board of Hillsborough County. They said they developed the ASO, Administrative Service Organization, which meant they would have had a hand in quality needs assessments. And they said they hadn't. So I'm a little confused. What was their role in developing an ASO if they didn't do the needs assessment? And why the disconnect?
So
And
that
then
came out in
also-
their review. Their
I'm sorry?
reference. That did come out in their reference, if you want that real quick.
Sure.
So the individual who set up the ASO was actual employee of PCG at the time and did that work. And then the children's board determined, like they were involved with it for a while, the children's board determined they wanted to bring it in-house and actually hired the person from PCG who did the work and is now an employee of the children's board. But apparently it was through a subcontract. And her time working there was great. Her time, she said it was a great company to work for, but she's the one who did the work, so that expertise is now no longer in PCG. That expertise is in children's board.
I will leave it alone. So then the other question is about the selection of their subcontractor, who has a lot of experience with young adults and finding about workplace needs assessments, and how adaptable is that work to the work we're asking them to do? Because that subcontractor seems to have a niche, but doesn't seem to understand, doesn't have experience in what we're asking for. So why them and why not a provider had a greater needs assessment capacity?
I will come to you for that question, Walter. And, Neil,
And I still like to, yeah.
I'm coming to you about the question for the ACEs, perfect, okay. And then,
And then they have their generic. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Neil can do that one.
all right. So, okay, all right, let me just make sure I'm talking. And then Fred, I will, if we fall flat on being very specific about what we need in the contract with regards to the key people and identifying that clearly and who's doing what, I may ask you to meet, provide some additional insights. Okay. Yes,
PCG referred to their project in Dutchess County, New York. From a very quick look on the internet, it's a county very similar size to Leon. It's almost 300,000 people. 80% white. So I don't know if that gets them the diversity experience that we were looking for. You asked them a very specific question about diversity, and they have a diversity manager that they're engaging with, but their experience isn't from a diversity standpoint. In this, they keep referring back to that project as their big experience, but it wasn't a diverse population. Yes, but they didn't refer to experience needs assessments.
Madam Chair, are you ready?
I am ready, sir. Is everybody else ready?
One thing I would just point out is Fred crunched the numbers on the flights or the trips.
Right.
And
Those aren't 4-day trips, because on average it's $600 a trip. So I get it. They describe more in the verbiage of their proposal.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the budget to see how they're really thinking about this. And it's 6 trips, $600 trips. That's a short trip.
That's a very short trip,
Yeah.
yeah. So I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
agree.
and they're all running together for me. But I do remember one particular proposal that indicated, and I thought it was cute, that they may have one trip, but they may do more than one focus group for that day.
Right.
So one in the morning, one in the evening. That could be one trip, 2 focus groups.
Right, I would
But yeah,
push
getting
on
to
that.
clarify,
Right.
it's technically 6, right?
Okay.
All right, I'm stopping this recording.
Okay.
Let the record show that. And we will come back together momentarily.